You ever wonder why the people who hurt you the most are the ones who claim to love you first? Why you, of all people, always attract the ones who wear masks, who charm you with words but leave your soul aching? Maybe it's because you're not just anybody. Maybe you're a fallen angel in human skin, one who was saved, not to suffer, but to carry out a prophetic love story the enemy keeps trying to sabotage. Narcissists don't just stumble into your life. They are drawn to you, obsessed with your light, and desperate to feed off the divine energy you barely understand yourself. But what if I told you their obsession is the biggest clue that you were chosen for something greater? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why they targeted you, what your pain was preparing you for, and why your true love hasn't arrived yet, because heaven's been protecting you from counterfeits. If any part of your soul just whispered "that's me," then hit subscribe, leave a comment below, and let's walk this truth out together, because your comeback is spiritual, and it starts now. Before you could receive prophetic love, you had to survive spiritual warfare. Narcissists were the test, not the destination. They told you love would be beautiful, that when it was right, it would feel peaceful, nourishing, and safe. But that's not what you experienced, is it? You gave your heart to someone who seemed perfect at first, someone who mirrored your soul, made you feel seen, chosen, even magical. And for a moment, you believed that maybe, just maybe, this was it. The connection felt spiritual, but slowly, things shifted. The warmth turned cold. The admiration became criticism. You weren't loved. You were studied, drained, and broken down piece by piece. And still, you held on, thinking, if I love deeper, maybe they'll come back to who they were. But they never did, because who they were in the beginning wasn't real. And that's the pain no one warns you about. The pain of a delayed destiny. The ache of waiting for a love that aligns with your soul while surviving the one that almost destroyed it. But here's the truth that changes everything. That delay wasn't punishment. It was protection. You were preserved, sealed, for a love that's not just romantic but prophetic. One that activates your purpose instead of silencing it. But before you could receive it, you had to learn the difference between divine connection and spiritual attack. Because not everyone who walks into your life was sent by God. Some were allowed as a test. Narcissists are master deceivers. They mimic the light. They study your wounds, your softness, your loyalty, and reflect it back to you until you fall into the illusion. And once they know you're emotionally invested, they begin the slow sabotage. But that sabotage isn't just emotional, it's spiritual. It targets your identity. It warps your view of love, of self, of God. And that's where the war begins. You weren't just fighting for love. You were fighting to remember who you are. Because narcissists don't just hurt you. They try to erase you. They rewrite the narrative of your worth using silence, manipulation, guilt, and charm. But something in you didn't die. Something in you refused to forget your light. And that's what makes you different. That's why you're still standing. Not because you're weak for loving the wrong one, but because you were spiritually strong enough to survive a counterfeit. You see, prophetic love cannot be rushed. It's not built in chaos, confusion, or emotional starvation. It arrives when the soil of your heart is no longer wounded but wise. And wisdom comes through fire, through betrayal, through walking away from someone you once begged God to let you keep. That's the divine delay. You weren't late. You were being refined. The heartbreak wasn't rejection. It was redirection. And no, this isn't just some pretty phrase to make you feel better. It's a truth rooted in the spiritual realm. The narcissist was a mirror, but not the kind that shows you your beauty. They were the kind that shows you where you still bleed. And through that pain, your soul began to shift. You learned discernment. You started to pray differently. Not for someone to love you, but for the strength to love yourself enough to wait. And that shift changed everything. Because now, you no longer crave chaos and call it passion. Now, you don't chase potential. You look for peace. You don't beg to be chosen. You recognize when someone is sent. This is what the delay was for. It was to heal you so that when prophetic love does arrive, you're not guarded, you're grounded. You're not desperate, You're discerning. And more importantly, you're not looking for someone to save you, because you already did that. You saved yourself. Through every tear you cried in silence. Through every moment you doubted your worth. Through every time you felt foolish for loving someone who never had the capacity to hold your heart. You rose anyway, and that rising is sacred. It's what makes you a match for something greater than just romance. You're a match for legacy, for a connection that doesn't just feed your ego, it feeds your spirit. That's prophetic love. It doesn't show up to distract, it shows up to align. But only when you're ready. And readiness doesn't come from perfection, it comes from healing. From finally realizing that what happened to you wasn't your fault, but what you choose next is your responsibility. So if you're still wondering why the one who promised everything ended up leaving you empty, know this, it wasn't love. It was a counterfeit designed to delay the real thing. The enemy sends decoys before destiny, to discourage you, to confuse you, to make you think your standards are too high. But your standards are divine, and divine timing cannot be manipulated. You were delayed because you are worth more than what you accepted before, because you were chosen to carry a love that is sacred, a love that reflects the Creator, not chaos. You are not hard to love. You were just easy to use, by someone who had no intention of honoring your soul. And it hurts. It hurts to be loyal to the wrong one. It hurts to believe in potential that never became reality. But that hurt was a doorway. It was the beginning of your awakening. Because now you know, real love doesn't beg for space in your life. It fits. It flows. It doesn't take your power. It multiplies it. It doesn't punish you for your softness. It protects it. So don't fear the delay. Don't resent the silence. Don't question your worth because someone couldn't recognize your value. Some doors close to protect your future. Some hearts break so you never settle again. And some people come into your life not to stay, but to push you back to yourself. That's what narcissists do. They force you to confront your own voids. And once you fill them with truth, they no longer have power over you. That's when the healing begins. That's when clarity returns. That's when love, real, divine, prophetic love, can finally find you. Not because you're searching, but because you're whole. And when wholeness meets wholeness, heaven breathes. That's what you were being prepared for all along. Your pain carries light. Narcissists are addicted to that glow, not because they love you, but because they want to feed off what they lack. You've been through things most people wouldn't survive. Wounds that cut deep. Betrayals that cracked your soul. Moments that made you question your worth, your sanity, your very existence. And yet, here you are, breathing, standing, soft, still capable of loving, even when love hasn't always been kind to you. That's not weakness. That's light. And not just any light, but the kind that's born in darkness. The kind that glows not because everything has been easy, but because you didn't let the darkness change who you are at your core. And that light, it doesn't go unnoticed, especially by narcissists. Narcissists have an uncanny ability to find the brightest souls in the room. Not the loudest, not the most successful, but the ones who carry something spiritual, something ancient, resilient, and sacred. They can feel it, even if they can't name it. It's an energy, a frequency, a softness that doesn't come from pretending, but from surviving. It's in the way you love, the way you forgive, the way you see people beyond their surface. And unfortunately, that's the very thing that draws narcissists in like moths to a flame. But not because they want to love you. No, they want to consume you. You see, narcissists are not drawn to your beauty. They are drawn to your essence, to the light in you that they know they've lost. They sense, even subconsciously, that you have something they don't. Empathy, intuition, divine connection, grace. They want to be close to that light, not to bask in it, but to steal from it. Because deep down, narcissists are spiritually hollow. Their egos are bloated, but their souls are starving. And when they encounter someone who still glows even after being broken, they become obsessed, addicted, possessive. Not out of love, but out of lack. And that's what you need to understand. They didn't love you. They craved you. They fed on you. They used your light to mask their emptiness. That's why they mirrored you so perfectly at first. That's why they clung to your every word, matched your values, seemed so emotionally in tune. They weren't connecting with you. They were studying you, learning how to reflect your glow so you would let your guard down. And once they felt they had you, the shift began. The warmth faded. The validation turned to criticism. The intimacy turned to manipulation. Why? Because once the light was theirs to access, the hunger grew, and no amount of love you gave could fill the void inside them. So they took, and took, and took, until you felt like you had nothing left. But here's the miracle. You still glowed. Even in the midst of your breakdown. Even after crying yourself to sleep. Even when your heart felt shattered and your trust destroyed. Something in you kept shining. Maybe a little dimmer. Maybe a little bruised. But never extinguished. Because your light isn't surface level. It's spiritual. It comes from a deeper place. Rooted in your soul. Anchored by your truth. And narcissists can't destroy that. No matter how hard they try. And oh, do they try. They insult it. Gaslight it. Dismiss it. They make you question it. They twist your perception until you begin to believe maybe you are the problem. Maybe you're too sensitive. Too intense. Too emotional. Too much. But what they are really doing is trying to convince you that your light doesn't exist. Because if you forget you have it, you stop protecting it. And when you stop protecting it, they have full access to it. That's the game. It's not about love. It's about energy. And if you've ever walked away from a narcissist feeling drained, lifeless, confused, and numb, now you know why. It's spiritual theft. But it didn't work. Because you're here. And your light is still flickering. Maybe not as bright as it used to be. But flickering is enough. Flickering means it's still alive. And light that's born from pain burns the strongest. So stop questioning what made you a target. Stop asking, why me? The answer isn't because you're broken. It's because you're powerful. It's because even in your lowest moments, you radiate something eternal. Something the narcissist lost a long time ago. Maybe even before they became who they are. And while they might have fooled you into thinking you needed them, the truth is, they needed you. They needed your glow to feel relevant. They needed your heart to feel human. But you don't need to keep dimming your light to make them feel whole. That's not your job. It never was. You are not here to be drained. You are not here to be used as an emotional crutch. You are not here to be the fuel for someone else's illusion. You are here to shine, to heal, to rise. And that rising might come with solitude for a while. It might mean walking alone. It might mean shedding old versions of yourself that begged for love in places that only handed out control. But in that rising, your light will return. Not the light you used to beg others to notice, but the one you finally learned to honor for yourself. Because the right ones, the ones sent, not stumbled, won't be threatened by your glow. They'll protect it. They'll recognize it. They'll match it with a glow of their own. But before they arrive, you must first understand the sacredness of the light you carry. You must stop giving it away to those who only show up with empty hands and hungry egos. That's the test. That's the awakening. That's when everything shifts. So yes, you may have fallen. You may have been tricked, drained, humiliated. But you are still glowing. And that glow isn't just survival, it's sacred. Don't ever forget, it was never your softness that made you weak. It was your light that made you a target. And now that you know that, you'll never let it be taken again. You thought it was love. It was a lesson. You were sent to awaken something in them, but not to stay. There was a time when you believed it was real. The way they looked at you, how they said your name, how they made you feel like you were finally understood. It felt fated, spiritual, even. You didn't stumble into their life. It felt like the two of you were drawn together by something bigger than either of you could explain. And in a way, that was true. But here's the part that no one talks about. Just because it was spiritual, doesn't mean it was meant to last. Just because you were sent into their life with divine purpose, doesn't mean they were meant to stay in yours. What you thought was love was an assignment, and you didn't fail it just because it ended. You were sent to awaken something in them, not to complete them, Not to fix them. Not to save them. Just to activate. That's it. You came into their life as a mirror. As a reminder. As a glimpse of the divine. Of what healing, presence, and unconditional light could feel like. And for a while, they saw it. They saw you. Not the surface you, but the soul of you. And that terrified them. Because the truth is, many people don't want healing. They want comfort in their dysfunction. They don't want truth. They want control. And when you came in, glowing with energy that exposed everything they buried, they had a choice: evolve or reject the mirror. And sadly, most narcissists choose rejection. Not because you weren't good enough, but because your presence made them confront the parts of themselves they spent years avoiding. That's why it turned. That's why the person who once adored you became cold, distant, even cruel. It wasn't that you changed. It's that they could no longer hide. Your love was too clay. Your energy too pure. You started to reflect their chaos back at them. And when that happened, the mask slipped. You were never meant to stay with someone whose growth depended on your silence. The universe never intended for you to shrink to be loved. But we confuse assignments with soulmates when we haven't healed. We hold onto connections that feel intense, thinking intensity means destiny. But sometimes, intensity is just trauma disguised as passion. They weren't your forever. They were your turning point. And maybe that hurts to hear. Maybe you're still holding on to the memories, the maybes, the what if they change thoughts that replay in your mind late at night. But here's the truth. They might never change. And even if they do, it was never your responsibility to be the reason. You were never sent to fix their brokenness. You were sent to show them that healing is possible. Whether they choose it is on them. You were the spark. But the flame, they had to build that themselves. And maybe they didn't. Maybe they ran. Maybe they betrayed you. Maybe they twisted the narrative and made you the villain in a story where you only ever wanted to love them back to life. And that's the tragedy of being sent as an assignment. They often don't recognize the gift until it's gone. But don't let their blindness make you question your light. Don't let their inability to receive make you doubt what you gave. You gave presence. You gave depth. You gave a reflection of something divine. And that is never wasted. Even now, long after they are gone, your presence lingers in their soul. Not because you were obsessed, but because you were real. You touched something in them that no one else had access to. And that's why they tried to break you. Because hurting you gave them the illusion of power. They couldn't rise to meet you. So they tried to pull you down. And for a while, it worked. You questioned everything. Your worth. Your instincts. Your faith. But even in your confusion, something inside you whispered, "This isn't the end." Because it wasn't. It was only the end of the assignment. Not the end of your story. You completed what you were sent to do. You awakened something in them they never asked for, but desperately needed. And now, the real healing begins. For you. Because the moment you stop blaming yourself for their choices, you start reclaiming your power. You start realizing that love should never feel like war. That being chosen should never come with conditions. That love, real love, doesn't demand that you bleed to feel worthy. You were sent to remind them of light. But now, you're being called to remember your own. To stop defining your value by who receives you and start honoring the fact that you were never meant to stay in places where your soul was dying. That wasn't love. That was the test. And you passed, not because you stayed strong, but because you eventually walked away. With tears, with scars, with lessons, but also with wisdom. Because now, you'll never again confuse spiritual warfare with sacred connection. You'll know the signs. You'll recognize when someone wants your heart, but not your healing. You'll sense when someone wants access to your energy, but not the responsibility of holding it with care. And most of all, you'll know that being sent doesn't mean you're meant to settle. You were the lesson. And one day, they'll remember you as the one who showed up when they were lost in themselves. But by then, you'll be long gone. Walking in peace. Aligned with your purpose. Preparing for a love that isn't an assignment, but a reward. Because prophetic love doesn't arrive in confusion. It meets you in clarity. It doesn't demand your pain. It honors your growth. And it doesn't leave you wondering. It stays. So no, you weren't crazy. You weren't dramatic. You weren't too much. You were sent. And you did exactly what you were meant to do. Now it's time to let them go and return to yourself. You remind them of what they lost. Divine favor, grace, and depth. But instead of honoring you, they try to control you. There's something different about you. And they saw it the moment you walked into the room. Not just your appearance, not just the way you carry yourself, but something deeper. A presence, a light, a stillness that feels like it came from another realm. You carry the kind of energy that unsettles people who are disconnected from their spirit. And for a narcissist, that's exactly what you are, a walking contradiction to everything they lack. You don't have to try to shine. You just do. Your compassion isn't calculated. Your empathy isn't performative. Your love isn't manipulative. You move with divine grace, not because you're perfect, but because your soul is rooted in something real. And narcissists, no matter how confident they appear, can feel that. They can sense it. And they hate it. Why? Because you remind them of what they lost. Or maybe, what they never had. Divine favor, grace, inner peace, emotional depth, the ability to truly connect, not just perform. You represent everything their ego tries to mimic, but fails to truly embody. And when someone sees you as a symbol of what they cannot access, their instinct isn't always admiration. Sometimes, it's control. That's why narcissists don't love you. They want to possess you. Because in their mind, if they can own what you carry, maybe they can finally feel whole. But spiritual gifts can't be owned, and divine energy can't be manipulated. So instead of honoring your soul, they try to cage it. They want your light in a box, close enough to benefit from, but confined enough that it doesn't outshine them. And the more they sense your power, the more they panic, because your presence exposes them. Not with words, but with contrast. You being you shows them everything they are not. Your calm highlights their chaos. Your honesty reveals their lies. Your spiritual alignment uncovers their deep void. And instead of choosing to rise with you, they choose to compete, to dominate, to distort. Because if they can't ascend to meet you, they'll try to drag you down to meet them. That's when the control begins. Slowly, subtly, they question your intuition. They chip away at your confidence. They make you feel like your emotions are too intense, your kindness too naive, your boundaries too dramatic. But what they are really doing is trying to disconnect you from your divinity. Because as long as you forget who you are, they can hold power. As long as you doubt your own worth, they can manipulate the narrative. And as long as they can convince you that you need their validation, they can keep feeding on your light. But here's the truth they don't want you to realize. They never owned you. Not your soul. Not your mind. Not your spirit. You were never theirs to keep. Because you don't belong to people. You belong to purpose. And narcissists don't understand purpose. They only understand possession. That's why they chase people they think are powerful, only to destroy them once they get too close. It's not about love. It's about control. Because deep down, they know they can't duplicate what you have. They can imitate it, but it won't last. Because true spiritual depth can't be performed. It's lived. It's earned. It's embodied. And no matter how much they try to act like you, they can never be you. You were sent into their life not to be captured, but to be a mirror, a divine interruption, a reminder of the path they rejected. And when someone rejects their own light, they will always try to snuff out yours. That's why the closer they got to your heart, the more they tried to sabotage it. Not because you were wrong, but because you were right. You were real. And real is threatening to people who've built their entire identity on illusion. They saw the divine in you, and instead of bowing to it with reverence, they tried to chain it with fear. But your soul was never meant to be domesticated. You are wild in the most sacred way, anchored to heaven but unafraid of the fire. You love deeply, not foolishly. You forgive freely, but you do not forget. And even after all the pain, something in you refused to go numb. That's what sets you apart. That's what makes your light uncontainable. They could break your heart, but they couldn't dim your spirit. And no matter how many times they tried to reduce your worth to their level of understanding, You remained untouchable. That's what frustrates them the most. That even after all their efforts, you still rise. You still glow. You still speak life. You still carry peace. Because what they couldn't understand is this: your power isn't performative. It's spiritual. It's ancient. It's coded into your being. You've walked through darkness and came out carrying flames. You've been betrayed, abandoned, misunderstood. And still, you chose love. Still, you chose compassion. Still, you chose truth. That's not weakness. That's divinity. And narcissists will never be able to own that. They wanted to brand you as theirs. But you were already marked by something higher. You were born with heaven's fingerprint on your soul, and no human can erase that. Not even the ones who tried the hardest. And maybe they still linger in your thoughts. Maybe there are moments when you wonder if it was all in your head. But it wasn't. You were targeted because you are treasured. You were attacked because you are anointed. And the moment you realize that, fully, deeply, you take your power back. Not by becoming hard. Not by turning cold. But by staying rooted in the truth that they tried to make you forget. You are divine property. But you are not owned. You are guided, not controlled. And the love you seek is not the kind that chains. It's the kind that frees. The ones who come next will not compete with your light. They will protect it. They will honor it. But until then, you protect it yourself. You honor your own soul the way they refused to. Because the one who couldn't hold you never deserved you. Not because they didn't want you, but because they didn't know how to love something they couldn't possess. The narcissist senses your spiritual identity. Even if they don't understand it, they fear your light and try to dim it. There's something about you they couldn't explain, and that terrified them. You didn't come with arrogance. You didn't demand attention. You didn't walk around boasting or shouting to be seen. And yet, the atmosphere shifted when you entered the room. Something sacred moved with you. Something unshakable. And even if they couldn't name it, they felt it. The narcissist especially. Because while the average person might admire your presence, the narcissist fears it. They may smile, flatter, or pretend to honor you at first, but beneath the surface, something inside them feels threatened. And it's not because of how you look, what you wear, or even what you say. It's because of what you carry. You carry the blueprint of heaven, not in a loud, performative way, but in your soul. Your energy doesn't lie. Your spirit speaks before your mouth does. You were born with a kind of spiritual authority that doesn't scream. It whispers, and yet it echoes in the hearts of everyone you meet. You walk with an internal knowing, a sensitivity to energy, a compassion that reaches places most people are afraid to touch. You see through people, not to judge them, but to understand them. You sense what others are afraid to feel. And that ability, it's divine. It's not learned, it's remembered. Because deep within you lies the memory of where you came from. A connection to the sacred. A code. A map. A frequency that disrupts the ego in those who are disconnected from their source. And when a narcissist encounters someone like that, someone like you, it disrupts their illusion. You see, narcissists live in a carefully curated world built on control, image, and manipulation. Their sense of self is not built from within. It's a fragile performance held together by praise, attention, and dominance. They survive by feeding on power they didn't earn, validation they don't return, and love they don't reciprocate. And then, you show up. Not performing, not pretending, just being. And your being threatens their entire foundation. Because they feel your alignment. They sense your depth. They know, without knowing how they know, that you can see them. Not just the version they present to the world, but the shadow underneath. And that's dangerous to someone who has spent their life hiding behind masks. Your light is a mirror. And narcissists don't want mirrors. They want puppets. They want people who affirm their false identity, not ones who expose it. And exposure doesn't always come through confrontation. It comes through contrast. You simply existing in truth reveals the lies they've buried. And so, they try to dim you. At first, they may pretend to admire your light. They may mirror your spirituality, quote your words back to you, even express your sensitivity. But over time, admiration turns to envy. Envy turns to resentment. And resentment turns to control. They begin to question your intuition, subtly discredit your voice, dismiss your insight. Not because you're wrong, but because you're right, and your rightness makes them feel powerless. You become a threat to their throne. And in their world, threats must be silenced. They may accuse you of being too sensitive, too intense, too spiritual. They may make you feel foolish for following your intuition, or too emotional for having empathy. But here's what they are really doing, trying to pull you out of alignment. Because as long as you stay aligned, you can't be controlled. As long as you stay connected to your source, you can't be manipulated. And they know this. They know that if you ever fully realized who you are and what you carry, you'd never tolerate their games. You'd walk away, not in rage, but in peace. And peace is something they cannot compete with. Because when you carry the blueprint of heaven, you walk in divine timing. You sense when something is off. You feel when someone's energy shifts. You intuitively know who's genuine and who's performing. You may doubt it at first, because the narcissist wants you to. But deep down, you already know. You've always known. You just needed the courage to believe what your spirit was whispering all along. You were never crazy. You were never dramatic. You were discerning, spiritually aware. And now, you're awakening. You're beginning to remember the light within you that was buried under years of gaslighting, manipulation, and emotional warfare. And as you rise, you start to see the patterns. You start to understand that you were targeted not because you were weak, but because you were powerful. Because your presence carries a divine imprint. You are a living reminder of what it means to be whole, even while healing. To be broken, yet holy. To be quiet, but deeply felt. And that kind of presence, that's a threat to every narcissist still hiding from themselves. But now that you see it, really see it, you no longer have to shrink. You no longer have to prove your worth to people who only came to drain it. You no longer have to argue with someone who only listened to twist your words. You get to stand in your light, not because it makes others comfortable, but because it's who you are. And that light, it's no longer up for negotiation. Yes, they feared your light. Yes, they tried to dim it. Yes, they failed. Because your light wasn't given to you by them, and it can't be taken by them. It was placed within you by design. Not to make you arrogant, but to make you aware. Not to make you worshipped, but to make you walk in purpose. And as you continue walking, you'll begin to notice the right people are not intimidated by your glow. They are inspired by it. The right ones won't try to compete with your presence. They'll protect it. They'll see you not as property, not as a challenge, but as a reflection of the divine within themselves. So let them fear you. Let them talk. Let them go. Because you weren't sent here to be accepted by everyone. You were sent to awaken the few who are ready to remember. You carry the blueprint of heaven, and from now on, you walk like it. Being near you forces them to face themselves. That's why the love bombing turns to hate. It's their ego defending itself from truth. They were drawn to you instantly, as if something magnetic pulled them in. You might have thought it was love at first sight, soul recognition, divine timing. And in a way, it was just not the way you imagined. What they saw in you wasn't just beauty or kindness. It was something much deeper. Something they couldn't put into words, but could feel in their bones. You carried something ancient, something sacred. A fallen angel energy, marked not by perfection, but by a kind of wisdom born from pain. You had been through hell, and yet, you still carried light. You had every reason to shut down, but you stayed open. You had every right to harden, but you chose to feel. And that scared them. Not because you were scary, but because your very presence exposed everything they were trying to hide. That's the mirror effect. It's not about confrontation. It's about contrast. Your existence shined a light on their shadows. You didn't need to accuse them, analyze them, or even speak a word. Just being near you forced them to see parts of themselves they've spent years avoiding. Truths they've buried so deep they forgot they were even there. You brought that to the surface. Not on purpose, but because your frequency didn't align with their facade. Your fallen angel energy held a truth they weren't ready to face. That healing is possible. That love doesn't have to be manipulation. That connection doesn't require performance. And most of all, that someone can walk through fire and still choose peace. They couldn't handle that. At first, they loved it. Or rather, they loved the idea of you. They clung to your warmth, mirrored your values, studied your spirit. They admired your strength, your softness, your ability to make space for others without demanding anything back. It was intoxicating. And for a while, they believed they could match it. But slowly, that admiration turned into something else. The love bombing, the flattery, the intensity, the "you're the one" declarations wasn't real intimacy. It was their ego trying to secure something sacred before they were found out. Because deep down, they knew they couldn't sustain what you carry. They could copy it, mimic it, but not hold it, not honor it. And once your light became too bright, once you started seeing too clearly, sensing too deeply, the mask began to crack. That's when the love turned cold. That's when the compliments turned to criticisms. The connection became a competition. Suddenly, you were too sensitive. Too much. Too intense. But really, you were too real. And reality is unbearable to someone living behind a mask. You weren't the problem. You were the mirror. And mirrors don't lie. That's why it hurts so deeply. Because you didn't just lose a person. You lost the illusion. The version of them that love-bombed you wasn't real. It was a reflection of what they thought you wanted, mixed with their desire to own what they couldn't become. When you carry fallen angel energy, you walk through this world with sacred scars. You understand pain in a way others run from. You feel everything. You notice shifts in energy, words left unspoken, motives hidden in kind gestures. And that makes you a threat. Not because you want to destroy anyone, but because your presence alone dissolves the lies people tell themselves. And narcissists, they live in those lies. They survive through those illusions. You didn't destroy them. You simply existed. And it was too much. Because if they truly accepted your love, they'd have to admit that everything they've been doing to avoid their own healing has been a lie. They'd have to stop manipulating and start mending. They'd have to stop performing and start feeling. And for someone who's built their identity on defense mechanisms, that's terrifying. So instead of rising to meet you, they resent you. Instead of changing themselves, they try to change you. They chip away at your confidence. They flip the narrative. They rewrite history. And slowly, they turn your light against you. You start to question yourself. You wonder if you were too needy, too loving, too idealistic. But you weren't any of those things. You were the mirror. You were the gift. And they couldn't receive it. Because receiving you would have required them to face their darkness. And narcissists rarely face anything they can blame on someone else. So the cycle begins. Love, devalue, discard, hoover. Not because you changed, but because your consistency exposed their inconsistency. Your loyalty highlighted their betrayal. Your purity, even in brokenness, was unbearable for a soul trapped in self-deception. But here's the truth. Your fallen angel energy was never meant to be caged by the insecure. You were never meant to prove your worth to someone who only saw you as a threat. You are a revealer, a soul activator. And yes, it's painful. Because many will confuse your reflection for an attack. Many will push you away, not because you're wrong, but because you're right. You walk with too much light for people still hiding in the dark. But that doesn't mean you dim it. It means you protect it. It means you start recognizing who is ready for the mirror, and who will only try to shatter it. Because the right ones, the ones who've done the work, the ones who are healing too, won't run from their reflection. They'll thank you for it. They'll sit with it. They'll grow with it. They'll see your fallen angel energy not as a threat, but as a gift. A reminder that even the broken can be holy. That even after ruin, beauty can rise. That being sensitive is not a flaw. It's a superpower. And one day, someone will look at you and say, "You didn't just reflect me. You reminded me who I really am." Until then, guard your energy. Love yourself the way you loved those who couldn't hold your light. Know that the hate wasn't hate. It was fear. And fear isn't your burden to carry. Let them run from the mirror. Let them label you, blame you, twist your truth. Because mirrors don't argue. They reflect. And your reflection was always sacred. It's one of the hardest truths you'll ever face on your healing journey. Not everyone who enters your life is meant to stay. Some souls arrive not to build a future with you, but to awaken something within you. And when it comes to the narcissist, that truth cuts even deeper. Because in the beginning, it didn't look like a lesson. They looked like love. They showed up with passion, intensity, connection. It felt like destiny. Like your hearts had met before. They said all the right things, mirrored your values, and touched the softest parts of your spirit. You opened wide because you believed they were the one. And in a way, they were. Just not in the way you hoped. They weren't your forever. They were your trigger, the catalyst, the turning point, the storm that pushed you to rebuild. They came to show you where you were still bleeding, still doubting, still giving your light away in hopes someone would finally say, "You're enough." But they couldn't say it because they didn't believe it for themselves. You see, narcissists don't enter your life to offer wholeness. They come carrying the very wounds you haven't healed yet. Their disrespect triggers your need for boundaries. Their love bombing awakens your longing to be seen. Their betrayal stays up the parts of you that still think love must be earned through pain. And while it hurts deeply, what they touch is exactly what needs to rise. It's confusing, right? How someone who caused you so much anguish could also be part of your spiritual alignment. But pain and purpose often share a path. The very person who shattered you might also be the one who woke you up. Not because they were wise, not because they were holy, but because the chaos they brought forced you to stop ignoring the truth your soul already knew. You were made for something greater. The narcissist didn't see your value, but they saw your power, and they feared it. So they tried to control it, contain it, twist it. But that very battle was what awakened the fire in you. The fire to say no more. The fire to reclaim your worth. The fire to stop chasing love from people who are afraid of it. They didn't come to be your partner. They came to be your mirror, your shadow, a reminder of who you no longer want to be, and what you'll never again accept. You were sent into their life as light, but their rejection of that light was never about you. It was about them, and your pain, as unbearable as it felt, was never a punishment. It was an initiation, into clarity, into boundaries, into discernment, into the deeper love you're now finally ready for. Narcissists try to mimic sacred love, but it always collapses because it lacks divine foundation. True love doesn't drain, it activates. There's a reason your soul still aches when you think back to what you believed was love. It felt spiritual, like destiny. It felt like the kind of connection written in the stars, orchestrated in the heavens, and delivered through divine timing. They mirrored your desires, your prayers, your deepest longings. You told yourself this must be it. The one, the long-awaited love sent from God. But as time passed, the glow faded. The words that once made your heart flutter began to feel hollow. The intimacy that once felt sacred turned into confusion, power games, and exhaustion. And slowly, you began to see what your soul had sensed all along. It was a counterfeit. Because prophetic love, real love, cannot be faked. It cannot be mimicked by ego. It cannot be forged by someone who refuses to surrender to truth. Narcissists study people like you. They observe what makes you open your heart. They mimic your spiritual language, your emotional intelligence, even your vulnerability. But beneath the surface, their love is rooted in control, not commitment. It's rooted in performance, not presence. And anything built on illusion cannot stand. No matter how intense it feels in the beginning, counterfeit love will always collapse, because it lacks divine foundation. That's what you started to notice, isn't it? The cracks, the inconsistencies, the way their love required you to shrink, silence your intuition, and sacrifice your peace. You were always tired, always second-guessing, always trying to keep the connection alive, even when it was draining the very life out of you. But that's how counterfeit love works. It imitates the surface of sacred love without carrying the substance. It gives you fireworks in the beginning, only to leave you in ashes later. It says the right things, but the energy underneath is hollow. You weren't crazy for believing it was love. You just didn't know yet how to discern the real from the fake. Because real, prophetic love doesn't exhaust you. It doesn't confuse you. It doesn't twist your softness into weakness or use your compassion as a leash. True love doesn't demand your silence. It honors your voice. It doesn't compete with your light. It protects it. Real love activates your spirit. It reminds you who you are, not who you need to become to keep someone around. And once you experience that kind of love, deeply, spiritually, you'll never again settle for the imitation. But to recognize the real, you had to encounter the counterfeit. The narcissist was the imitation. They tried to wear the mask of divinity. They cloaked their manipulation in spiritual language. They used soulmate talk to gain access to your heart. But what they wanted wasn't union. It was control. What they admired wasn't your soul, it was your energy. And once they had it, they no longer needed to pretend. That's when the devaluation began. That's when the manipulation escalated. That's when your sacred heart was treated like an emotional vending machine, only useful when giving. And yet, you stayed. For a while, you prayed for them, fought for them, believed you could love them back to life. And that's not weakness, that's your divinity. You carry love that's bigger than pain. But even divine love must be protected. Because what's sacred shouldn't be thrown to those who refuse to see its value. You weren't wrong for loving them. You were wrong for thinking they had the capacity to hold what you carried. They didn't. And they won't. Not until they are willing to surrender their ego, face their wounds, and rebuild on truth. But that's not your assignment. That's theirs. Your assignment is to remember this. Prophetic love can't be counterfeited. It may be delayed, but it will never come through deception. It will never demand your light in exchange for crumbs of affection. It will never arrive through manipulation. Then expect gratitude for staying. Real love feels like peace. It feels like clarity. It feels like expansion, not contraction. It activates your gifts. It brings you closer to God, not farther away from yourself. And if the love you had made you feel small, confused, drained, or afraid, that wasn't love. That was the test. You see, narcissists are masterful at impersonating what they believe love should look like. They will tell you they prayed for you. Your isolation wasn't punishment. It was protection. You were being refined for the one who would recognize your soul, not use it. There comes a time in every chosen soul's life when the silence gets so loud, it feels like abandonment. The people you trusted drift away. The doors you prayed for don't open. The love you thought would last shatters. And you're left standing in a space that feels forgotten, isolated, invisible, misunderstood. But what if that season of isolation wasn't a punishment, but a divine pause? What if that hidden season, when nothing made sense and no one could see you, was never about rejection, but redirection? You weren't being discarded. You were being set apart, not to be buried, but to be planted. You see, when heaven assigns you a mission, it doesn't launch you before you're ready. It doesn't place you in the spotlight when your spirit is still healing from wounds inflicted by those who only loved the version of you they could control. Your soul carries something rare, something sacred. And sacred things must be refined, not rushed. You were hidden because the world wasn't ready for your light. But more importantly, you were hidden because you weren't ready to release it without it being misused again. That season of being unseen wasn't wasted time. It was divine refinement. You were shedding old identities, unlearning survival patterns, and being stripped of false attachments that couldn't go where you're destined. The people who left, the ones who couldn't stay, that wasn't failure. That was clarity. Because the next chapter of your life doesn't require everyone from the last. You weren't being punished. You were being protected. Protected from the narcissist who would have drained your soul dry if God hadn't closed that door. Protected from the counterfeit connections that looked like love but were rooted in control. Protected from distractions, illusions, and half-grown people who weren't ready to meet you at your fullness. And while it hurt, while you questioned your worth, while you cried over the silence, you were actually being seen more clearly than ever before. Just not by people, by heaven, by the divine hand that knew your timeline better than you did. You weren't being abandoned. You were being aligned. Because before the mission comes the wilderness. Before the promise comes the preparation. You can't pour from a heart still leaking from unhealed wounds. You can't fulfill a sacred calling when you're still addicted to counterfeit love. So you were pulled back, hidden, protected. Not forever, but for a season. You endured spiritual abuse masked as love, and still kept your heart open. That's not weakness. That's chosen strength. They tried to break you in places you didn't even know could hurt. They twisted the language of love into a leash. They used God's name as a weapon. They cloaked control in intimacy, gaslighting in affection, and manipulation in spiritual terms. And you, being the open-hearted soul you are, gave them the benefit of the doubt. You believed them when they said they loved you. You trusted their prayers. You stayed when everything in you was crumbling, hoping that maybe, just maybe, it was you who needed to love a little harder, give a little more, or heal just a bit faster. But the truth is, you were never broken. You were chosen. And what you survived was not just heartbreak. It was spiritual warfare. It wasn't just emotional damage. It was soul violation. Because when someone weaponizes the language of spirit to dominate your heart, the wound cuts deeper than betrayal. It confuses your compass. It shakes your faith, not just in others, but in yourself. You start to question your intuition, your beliefs, your ability to discern love from illusion. And that's what makes spiritual abuse so devastating. It doesn't just hurt you. It makes you doubt the very tools you were born with to protect yourself. But you're still here. And that's proof. Proof that you are stronger than the manipulation. Proof that your purpose is more powerful than their agenda. Proof that no matter how many times your light was targeted, it could not be extinguished. Because what they didn't realize was this: your survival wasn't accidental. It was intentional. You are not just a survivor. You are evidence. Walking, breathing, radiant evidence that the chosen don't stay down. They rise. Even with cracked voices. Even with shaking hands. Even through tears. They rise. They thought they were silencing you. But all they did was amplify your message. They thought they were dimming your light. But all they did was reveal how fiercely it burns. Because real strength isn't loud, it's resilient. And you've shown a level of resilience most people will never understand. You kept your heart open even when it was safer to shut down. You kept loving even when love was used against you. That's not weakness. That's holy endurance. That's divine assignment. That's proof you carry something not even hell could steal. You see, the enemy doesn't waste bullets on empty targets. You were under attack because you're carrying something sacred. Something generational. Something that doesn't just bless you. It breaks chains for others. And the narcissist, the spiritual imposter, they saw that. Maybe not with language, but with energy. They felt your light. They envied your purity. They wanted to control what they couldn't match. So they latched onto your softness, pretending it was safety, only to try to reshape you into someone they could manage. But you were never meant to be managed. You were meant to be miraculous. And sometimes, that miracle has to be born through fire, through betrayal, through the slow death of illusions, through nights where you question everything and still decide to keep going. That's what makes you chosen. Not perfection, but perseverance. Not ease, but endurance. Not the absence of pain, but the refusal to become bitter because of it. You endured spiritual abuse and still found a way to bless others. You were lied to, and you still choose truth. You were betrayed, and you still choose to show up. That's not ordinary. That's chosen. That's anointing. That's heaven's hand all over your life. And maybe no one ever told you this, but you deserve to be proud of your survival. Not ashamed. Not quiet. Not hidden. Proud, because it means you're marked. And the weight you carry, it's not punishment, it's preparation. Yes, it was unfair. Yes, you should have been protected. Yes, they had no right to touch your soul with their broken hands. But even that pain became part of the alchemy, because now you carry discernment. Now you know how to spot a fraud beneath the scripture. Now you understand that not everyone who says God sent me is walking in the Spirit. Now you know the difference between a soul tie and a soul threat. You didn't just survive abuse, you evolved from it. And now you're dangerous. Dangerous to every false prophet who preys on soft hearts. Dangerous to every manipulator who thinks love can be bought with control. Dangerous to every system that silences victims in the name of spiritual order. Because you've been through it, and you made it out not bitter, but burning with clarity. Your scars aren't shame, they are signs. Markers of how far you've come, and how much hell couldn't hold you. And maybe you still feel tired. Maybe you still carry fragments of confusion, grief, shame. That's okay. Healing isn't linear. But don't confuse exhaustion for defeat. You are not weak, you are weathered.